All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you for coming out to AI UCI's event, How to Launch an AI Startup. As you know, this is one of our quarterly panels, something we do every quarter. We like to bring in some industry speakers to share their thoughts. And this time we wanted to focus specifically on the question of how do you launch an AI startup? So before we begin, let's think about why this matters and why it's important in the current context. Certainly, AI has transformed as a field a lot in the last 10 years. 2012, with the with the creation of AlexNet, we started to see, I guess, a massive democratization of the technology, and to the extent where these deep learning models or these very deep neural networks that were initially kind of restricted to research became something that were very practical, both for people to experiment with themselves and to be deployed on devices everywhere. And as a result, we're now looking at a situation where AI can solve a lot of problems in our world. And we've brought in three industry speakers who are specifically looking to apply AI to solve their own specific problems that they have encountered, which, I'll let them get into. But before we do that, it's best to introduce the panelists themselves and give you a little bit of context about their background. So first up, we have Tuan. He's going to be joining us from Boston virtually today. Tuan, he's currently the founder of The Point AI. It's a startup that's very interested in looking how to help people communicate with each other, particularly in a business context, but beyond that as well. He does, he's been in this startup space for a really long time. He previously founded ScholarJet, and since then he has been very active in the startup scene in Boston and has extensive knowledge from that ecosystem. He is also a member of the Forbes 30 Under 30. Next, we have John, who is going to be joining us from Toronto. So John is currently co-founder of UCI. It's a health tech startup focused on dermatology, and it's based in Canada. But before that, he was a researcher at Huawei, and even before that, he was a lead engineer on the University of Waterloo's autonomous bus project. So extensive experience in the, exploring and developing the cutting edge of AI, and now looking to transition to apply that to solving a hands-on problem that he himself has encountered, which he will get into. Lastly, we have Davit joining us from San Francisco. He got his undergrad in computer science and then proceeded to start his PhD, where he was doing a lot of research related to neuroscience and machine learning. And he actually decided to drop out to pursue a startup and called Active Loop, which is it's a formerly Y Combinator backed startup looking to build a database that makes AI, or to, streamline the workflow for building AI models. So without further ado, I'm going to also introduce Sarah, who is going to be hosting the panel for us. So she has a bunch of questions prepared that she'll be asking the panelists to get them, started off. And then from there, we'll open it up to you all, hopefully saving like 15 minutes at the end for you guys to ask your questions to the panelists. So with that, I am going to stop the speech and let's get the panelists over here. This one. Okay. Okay. Awesome. All right. Cool.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? All right, great. Thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to speak with us today. So I guess my first question for everyone on the panel is that what problem are you trying to solve with your company and why did you choose the problem? And it'll be great if you could go into how AI actually is a tool to helping you solve the problem as well. So I guess we can start with Jean and then move on to David and then Tuan.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Great to meet everyone. So the problem we are solving for us is the scarcity or shortage of dermatologists. Just to give you a bit of statistics, in Canada, the dermatology density is 1.7 per 100,000 people. In US, that number is a little bit better, about 3.36 there. Then when you look at actually the disparity between the urban areas and the rural areas, it's very striking, 4.11 compared to 0.085. So almost no dermatologist is available in rural areas. So thinking around that, really the problem was how can we use AI to kind of bring efficiency and enable the dermatologists to serve more people. Obviously, we need a way of deploying AI, right? So it's not a matter of just going to clinics and providing them some software with AI. But we thought, okay, we can build, first of all, a teledermatology software that allows that communication between a patient and a dermatologist, but as well allows the dermatologists themselves to triage, to have a way of triaging cases, knowing which one to deal with first, which one maybe you don't need to come into their office. You just need to buy some products that they can recommend. And then we kind of sort of have a multiplying effect of that process using AI. So really, I think that's what we're working on.
Yeah,
Very
on
cool.
our side.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tuan. Yeah.
Okay. So I started the Point AI, and feel free to visit the website, thepointai.com. It's pretty self-explanatory what stage we're in, but I had the idea of basically trying to solve the problem for people skill. So think about, say, coding skill and whatnot. We have effectively created products to decrease the learning curve on how to code. We can now build websites without codes. We can now build apps without codes, but then there's no such thing to decrease the learning curve on how to talk to people, right? So if you think about Chris Voss, which is like a very famous FBI negotiator guy, I'm pretty sure some of you guys know him. There are people who have years and decades of experience on how to connect with people, how to talk to people. And so I'm basically building a product trying to tackle the goal of human efficiency in terms of communication. Trust me, I know you guys know that there's a lot of people who are really bad communicators, right? And they don't know what the right word to say, they're super awkward and stuff like that. I started my first company when I was 20. English was my second language. I was dyslexic, and I basically was a really shy Asian kid, right? So I had to push myself to have like 40 meetings every week, starting my first company, to essentially educate myself on how to talk to people, right? I started from below 500 connections on LinkedIn to now over 12,000 connections on LinkedIn. Like I talk with students all the way up to like venture capitalists, right? So like that learning curve is not offered anywhere unless you really push yourself, right? And so when you first, let's say, like even when you graduate college, you don't even have that level of skill set. And so there's no product out there that's truly capable of you and understanding human beings and offering you suggestions on how to talk to the person that's coming across from you. So that's sort of like the overarching mission. But when I'm starting out, which is, some of you might think it's really lame, but I think it's really cool. Basically summarizing emails and trying to solve problems of, because of the pandemic, I think in 2022, there's over 250 billion emails sent and received every day. And I'm trying to utilize AI because I think it's the great tool to have to understand context, and basically utilizing NLP to understand human conversation and trying to offer and open up the tool of psychology later on. But we're building it out step by step by first summarizing emails. And then later on, we can offer solutions like, we already know how you typically reply. Like how many times have you read "Hope your week is going well" for like the 100th times in a row, or "Don't hesitate to ask any questions"? There's so many of these, and we can already guess what you're going to say, and so we can offer sort of like automatic responses after that. But that's my spiel.
That's pretty cool, Tuan. I actually had the same problems when I was going through a journey. So looking forward to have the vision enabled. So yeah, thanks for setting this panel up. I'm the founder of ActiveLoop. What we are building a database for AI. So we are less doing AI and more focusing on building the data infrastructure for enabling companies like Yuko AI or Point AI to actually build their solutions and scale. Maybe I can just give you a brief introduction about why I started the company. Before that, I was doing a PhD in neuroscience, and we were operating at petabyte scale brain images. And our problem, what we were trying to solve, is to try to reconstruct the connectivity of neurons inside the brain, and then to reason how and why the brain works. And the challenges we had is that taking just 1 millimeter volume of a mouse brain was a petabyte scale data set, which is 1,000 times of terabyte or 1,000 times of amount of the storage that you can store on your machines. And to be able to process that, that was costing us a lot of money. And our goal was to reduce this cost from $1 million to a couple $100,000 by rethinking how the data should be stored, how it should be streamed from the storage to the computing machines. Should we use CPUs or GPUs, and what kind of models to use? And those kind of insights helped us to start the company, get into Y Combinator, raise our seed fund, and we have been working with early companies to help them to be more efficient in terms of their machine learning in production, especially past few years when the generation of unstructured data or images, video, audio have been increased so much. Like today, 90% of the data itself is generated in unstructured forms. And you have all this awesome databases, data warehouses, data lakes. I don't know if you're studying that now or later, but they are a great fit for storing tabular data or maybe structured, semi-structured data. And you have these awesome companies like Snowflake or Databricks, but you don't have one for images, video, audio. And people still store them as files or objects on object storage, while like the data scientists themselves are like operating on top of this file, spending much of their time on working with the data itself instead of focusing on building those models to solve the problems. And that's what we enable data science teams to come up with AI products much faster by replacing their complex data infrastructure with a database for AI.
Thank you so much. Those are really interesting problems, and I'm so glad that all of you guys are working on being able to solve that with AI technology. So, seeing that most of your the reasons that you guys started your own company is from your own personal experiences, that leads me to my next question, which is how important is building interesting and unique experiences when it comes to starting your own company? And how do you suggest all these young people go around building these unique experiences? I guess we can go in the same order, starting from Jan.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think it's quite important to develop unique experiences, but I don't necessarily think that you have to go around looking for this special experience. Just try to live your life, do your daily activities, but obviously be a little bit more curious. Look beyond the surface, ask why, because most often you'll find that there's a lot of inefficiencies in everything we see every day. It's just that not everyone sees those inefficiencies. And then another aspect is, once you realize that there's some inefficiencies, are you able to solve them? Sometimes you may never realize because you don't have the tools to solve those problems. So what I would suggest to young people is develop the skills first and foremost, and then try to be exploratory, try to be open-minded, try to be involved and engaged with others, be curious what others are also working on. Because at the end of the day, if you get an opportunity to start a company, you want to work on something that you deeply care about. Startups is hard, especially if you start off by bootstrapping. So therefore, you really need to make sure that you have something that pushes you, and that is solving something that you deeply care about. And that's going to come down to probably two things: is solving your own problem or solving a problem that your friend and family has experienced. So really, that's what I would suggest. Be curious, be open-minded, and develop skills that are necessary.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, That is great. Actually, I'm curious. This is just a side note. How do you come up with your name, Yuko AI?
Oh yeah, good question. Yuko AI means Yuko means available in Swahili. Myself, I'm from East Africa, so that's where the
Great.
name comes
The
from.
only Swahili words I know. Thank you. Cool. So I think, back to what Gene said, you just gotta really have to expose yourself to different experiences. Like, just go out there, be an explorer. Like, come on, think yourself as though you're going on a quest, right? You have to expose yourself to many different areas in order to truly figure out what you care about, right? But I can offer sort of like my story on how I started my last company and this company. So my last company was called ScholarJet, and how I came about the idea was that I wrote 120 essays to apply for 40 scholarships when I wasn't able to afford to go to college. So I got myself $500,000 worth of scholarship. I went to school on a full ride, but I wrote a lot of essays. Like, this guy with English being his second language, right? So it was like, that was really difficult. So the idea was to help students earn a scholarship without having to write essays, right? So that was something that I experienced, right? But in actuality, during that process, I wanted to give a scholarship away, and I realized how stupid it is that when you set up scholarship, you have to read people's essays. I'm like, I don't want to read anyone's essay, right? So I was like, what if we can create a fun way to give scholarships away that's actually useful, right? So that's sort of like how I came about the idea. From the current idea is about my personal experience, the things that I care about. I really sit down and realize one of the biggest skill set that you need to succeed in life is how to talk to people, how to make connections with people, how to make friends, right? And so these are experiences that are really unique to yourself, right? You, at the end of the day, have to work on something that you feel comfortable to stand on top of the mountain and scream out the name of your company, and that it speaks true to you. And the only way that you can do that is to go out there and have more and more experience. Like, doing a startup will give you more, like, it makes you so old really quickly. You're gonna be like 21 with a mindset of like a 40-year-old, right? You have to, because you have to do every single thing right at a young age, or else you'll deal with people, industry people, who will look down on you because you're young, right? So you got to know what to say. But how do you get to know what to say? Well, you talk to more people, you ask for more advice, right? I actually was really inspired by watching a clip of Elon Musk back in the day, but who wasn't inspired? So it was like a 60 seconds clip of the reporter asking him, like, how do you start a rocket company? My man was like, oh, I just read a whole bunch of books and talked to a whole bunch of people. In my head, I was like, if he can do that, I can start a company by reading a whole bunch of books and talk to a bunch of people too. So I think when I was 20, I had a co-op, which was like a 6-month internship. I didn't do anything at that co-op. All I did was read books. I read 250 books within 6 months, and I taught myself so many things. So now I was like, holy crap, school didn't teach me anything. And so through these books, through these experiences that people gave, I was like, okay, so how do I start a business? What's the startup strategy like? Literally expose myself to Y Combinator by chance by the age of 20. When before, I was studying mechanical engineering. I'm just like, oh, I don't know what to do with my life. But then when I start reading, I was like, wow, knowledge. But yeah, that's my video.
Yeah, I'd like to add two more points to Tuan and Tran. Is like, the first point is that when you get an expert or experience, like deep experience, you really care. First of all, get insights, and these insights help you to shape how you think the future should be and how you think that you can actually change, the world, which sounds like fancy, but towards your vision or towards the insight that you believe that constructed on. So gathering those insights is pretty important. Second thing is, if you're solving a problem that you have, then it's very likely, I think YC says, it's very likely that others have this problem as well. So you're not only solving it for you, but for others as well. So there is some market for you to build a business on top. And the third thing that's very important, and I have seen this myself a lot, is when you're solving a problem that you deeply care, there will be so many times the company is going to fail apart. So many very difficult times that it's like there's basically no solution to go next. And if the thing that you're doing at the time, you don't really deeply care, you're gonna quit. And the first reason that any startup fails is because you quit, you don't care enough, and you want to work on something else. So picking something that you really deeply care and become an expert in this is very, very important for a startup.
Thank you guys so much for such great answers. Those are all really great advice, and I really appreciate all the personalized and fun stories you guys told. So I guess I can move on to my next question. One thing that I noticed about all these panelists is that they're actually all from different parts of North America. So my next question is, how important is location when building a company in terms of first solving the problem and second scaling?
Yeah, I can go next. I would say for us, we looked at two things. It's talent and investment. Really, those are, it comes down to that is, does the location have enough talent that you need to especially build AI? Now we're located in Toronto, and Toronto is very close to University of Toronto, University of Waterloo. So it's in a very good ecosystem in terms of talent. In terms of investment, US is definitely better, but obviously Toronto is also picking up. But to answer your question, really, I think it's those two things you have to look
at. So I started my first company in Boston, and oh boy, was it difficult. You guys are so lucky. You guys are in Silicon Valley, you know that? Like, you have no idea how no one over here in Boston know how to start a company. Like, absolutely nothing. There's no such thing as Y Combinator. Most companies are based in California, like all the FANGs companies there. There's no big things here. All the big companies here are boring, right? So like, it's not sexy. You know what people do here? They do research. Like, that's fine, right? Like, there's MIT and Harvard here, but it's not, so not only that, like, I dove into the ecosystem quite a bit, and I realized literally every year there's a venture firm starting me like, we're going to bring Silicon Valley to Boston. It's like, that ain't happening. Okay. One, they're incredibly racist, like absolutely racist. Okay. I'm not sure how much Silicon Valley is racist, but Boston is worse. Right. I met, so it took me 2 years to get a meeting with this top venture investor guy. And I had to go to like a meeting with the mayor and a whole bunch of business leaders there to actually call him out. And we just like, I posed a question to the mayor. I was like, why is it that only 10% of minority entrepreneurs that are actually receiving funding? And then he had to follow, like he's a part of like the city. So he had to come up and answer the question. And of course they gave you some BS answer. And then I finally was able to go up to him, got his card and took the meeting. And then we schedule a meeting 2 weeks later, show up at the office. It was like window glass, right? So you can see through it. It's a 30 minutes meeting. He was just chilling with his buddy on the side, looking at us, like just having a conversation. We are looking straight at him, literally wasted 20 minutes. He come in, only 10 minutes left, and he did not offer any help. And this guy, I can't name names because I don't want to get wrecked, is legit the most well-known investor in Boston. Right? He wrote books. I love his books. I was a huge fan. I was so excited. And then he treated me like crap. Right? So needless to say, that's the hard aspect. So location really do matter. It depends on how much access you have. Like talent, I agree, because when I try to find people in Boston to start a company, it's really hard. I have to go to Y Combinator co-founder dating website to find people, because none of these people know what startup is. And that's hard, right? But whenever I reach out to anyone in California, they're like, oh yeah, startups. Yeah, I know what that is, right? That's a huge difference. So you guys are so lucky that you guys in California. Just saying.
So since I'm from California, at least the companies, I should say the location doesn't matter. At least some of us should say that. But in high level, I want to say, I think the one number thing that we learn from Y Combinator is that you should pick a location where you get the most customers. Like basically you have to be very near to the customers. And if your customers are in Bay Area, and for most of the tech companies, they like their early adopters are in Bay Area, you get the exposure to get to talk to these people and then start building your product. What matters, your talent, like in our case as well, like for talent location doesn't matter. I'm originally from Armenia. And apparently what happened because of COVID is that a lot of companies that have been solely based in Armenia have been able to raise their investments and get their talent from Armenia remotely, including from top tier venture capitals from Bay Area. So because of COVID, I think the positive things, I think people now, you can have Zoom calls, and they were like closing deals over the first Zoom call, like $1 million dollar investment, just after a 30-minute chat. You have never met in person. And that has been like non-imaginable before COVID. So I think because of this remote setup, now the location becomes less important, though I will agree that there is some importance. There's still some VCs that qualify or kind of classify founders. Are they from Silicon Valley or not from Silicon Valley? So that still there are some issues like that. But apparently, I think over the time, especially when you see that so many startup hubs are getting created not only in North America, like by the way, Y Combinator was born in Boston and they moved to here 20 years ago. So
Boston sucks.
And you also have like places like in India or China as well, in like a lot of locations. You see these VCs are opening up their own venture firms in countries. So the location, I think, gets less important regarding to the talent or the investments, but also you should focus on customers. I think that's the number one thing. I'll leave this.
I do think that the investor's mindset is also very different between each coast. Like I raise money from both ends, and I've never heard a story of like having the first meeting and here 100K check. No, it's like over in Boston. I think when I first started to raise the first pre-seed round, I had 600 meetings to raise 50K. I'm like, what the, right? It's insane how like, and each checks were like 5K to 10K. We were making more money than the pre-seed round that we raised. Like that's insane to me. But like, you see how different that is over compared to Silicon Valley? It's very different. So just saying.
Yeah, no, I'll just tell you a personal story too, is when I'm trying to raise, usually if I'm talking to investors from Toronto, you find that, you know, they tell you you're raising a lot of money on high valuation. But if you're talking to an investor in, let's say, Silicon Valley, the story is different. It's like, okay, well, why are you sort of downselling yourself? Why are you not raising enough money, right? So you can't see already that obviously because of COVID, like you said, location doesn't matter that much because now I can pick up a phone and or go on a Zoom call and talk to an investor in the US. But you'll find that there's differences in perception and discussions around you know, how much the company should raise, for instance.
To your question, Jeffrey, yes.
I think, for example, if you are starting a biotech company, you likely prefer to be in Boston rather than Silicon Valley.
True, very true.
Depends on what kind of company you're working on. I also like consider like Bay Area is like this like the bubble is so getting bigger. It's now getting smaller, so that's great. But also Bay Area is super biased in terms of their selection, in terms of the companies. So if you can survive somewhere like outside of Silicon Valley, that's like, then you can really build a sustainable long-term business.
Thank you so much. Those are really interesting and insightful advice. So I guess I can move on to my next question. So why did you guys choose to use AI to solve the problem that you're passionate about? And for Tuan, as someone who had no background in AI before starting an AI company, how did you learn about AI, and why did you choose to incorporate AI compared to other technology and solutions available?
You guys can go first.
Okay, yeah, I can go first as well. Again, so for us, our philosophy is that we actually believe that AI isn't going especially in healthcare, isn't really a one bullet solves all. We believe in AI, in algorithm plus human. What that means is, how can AI help humans do what they do better, more efficient, but not really try to replace them, but really augment them. So that is why we're building an AI-based expert system. And the reason is really simple. It goes back to the problem we have is there's a shortage of dermatologists. And actually, because of this particular problem, if let's say you go to Instagram or Reddit or any other social media, you'll find a lot of people taking pictures of skin issues and posting them and asking, what conditions do I have? What products should I buy? What should I do? And so this is really projected to keep on growing. So there has to be a solution that would help these dermatologists or skin practitioners in general be more efficient. That means there's a lot of repetitive work that AI can do, but there's also what AI cannot do. Let's say offer compassion care, for instance, like talking to someone who is suffering from acne or some other really bad condition. They need to be consulted in some different tone than AI can express. So therefore, there has to be a partnership between AI and the human themselves. And I would say when we started, actually, we didn't have AI. It was 100% human. And that was meant for us to collect data. And then eventually we expand the percentage of the work that AI is doing. And so you can argue that in the future, it will be completely AI, and we hope that could happen. But the reality is, especially in healthcare, that will take a long, long time, because even if the AI ends up being 99% accurate, that 1% is very important to be able to catch, because of you have to look at the probability of, okay, if an error occurs, what is the effect of that, right? And so in healthcare, the effect is huge compared to other applications, perhaps.
Can I just add on to what here's Gene saying? The funny thing about human perception is, like, if the AI, let's say, is able to recognize an image like 95% of the time, right? And then it misses that last 5%. But when human is originally missing, like, can only do it like 80% correct, I still think that AI is worse. They still think that they do better than the AI. Like, that's what human thinks, right? And so you kind of have to get around that problem to actually show more results, because delivering an AI and people kept on thinking that they can do better than AI, which is really funny.
I also do agree with the human in the loop approach. And that's what you have seen. Even if you get state-of-the-art results, you still need to have the human in the loop to make this like call on the errors that the model is doing to be able to deploy it in production. And it's what you see as well in self-driving cars or this last mile delivery, small robots. You think the AI is driving, but actually behind the scenes, there are people who actually like have a game controller to drive them. And that's why we don't use AI in our products. So the main reason is that I think one of the things that what we try to think of is like AI, like if you, first of all, like yesterday I was in a conference and there's someone came to me and said, oh, I'm seeing there's a written database for AI. What do you understand by when you hear this word AI? And how much is it of itself a hype it is? And he was like a famous writer of Python books and so on. And I explained to him, it's like, hey, like the term itself is like overused. Whenever we say what happened like 20 years ago when AI beat the best chess player, then it's no longer an AI. Now AI beat AlphaGo, like the AlphaGo beats the best Go player. Now is this no longer an AI problem? When people were saying that AI will be no longer, like there's no possibility of AI being creative, and then you see these models that are generating these images. If you search for DALL-E 2 by OpenAI, then you will see, okay, now it can be creative. So what is AI itself? And first of all, I think that's something we have overused a lot, and a lot of also startups they add the AI term to increase their valuation for some of the millions. And I'm not saying any of
like
the
blockchain and crypto.
Exactly. So I think it's just a tool to solve the problem. And that's what I really believe with UCI and Point AI as well. Like, it's just a tool to be able to solve that. And to get there, you need to collect a lot of data and then just optimize this tool. And if machine learning or deep learning is not the best tool for solving the problem, pick the tools that you need with the easiest or quickest way to solve it. So I think that will be the approach on our side as well.
Yeah, the frame of thinking is equating it to which tool would you like to use that's best fit to solve your problem. That's it. Like back in the day, we have hammer and nails. And hammer and nails can hammer a nail, or you can use a rock. That's the same thing too, right? So you have to really consider it, right? So that's really unique to your understanding and your approach to solving the problem. So don't just think that AI can solve everything, right? Maybe in the future, but not now. So to your question of like, oh, how do you know to start a AI company when you have no background in it? Well, like Elon Musk said, I read a lot of books, talked to a lot of people. I actually read a book, I don't know, it's like written by a guy in Silicon Valley. You guys probably found him, but it's like how to start an AI company for founders who have no experience in AI. And he taught me like unsupervised learning, supervised learning. And you don't call an AI product an MVP. You call it a PUT, P-U-T, like predictable usability threshold. You're trying to achieve like 60 or 70% accuracy. You don't trying to achieve 100%. You need to get the quote unquote PUT out there to get people to use, and not trying to achieve maximum efficiency to begin with. And like he explained like data and when it comes to answering the questions to like investor, all you have to say is, oh, we have the data learning effects that will help us be defensive with our product. But yeah, I was trying to find the book. I was trying to look for it, but yeah, basically I read books. If you don't know anything about anything, you just acquire the knowledge for it, and then you'll end up knowing about it. Simple as that.
What great advice. Thank you so much. And those were really interesting books you've read. And okay, so let me move on to the next question. So since you guys are all solving really unique problems, how do you effectively and respectfully collect data to solve the problem using AI? We can start with Jean and move on to Juan and Davit.
So I think this is a very, very important question, really important. And I would say actually for us, we think of AI as a process that begins with data and ends with data. Yes, sometimes back, yes, developing new algorithms was important. And I think from the research point of view, it's still very, very important. But from application point of view, everything either succeeds or fails because of data with AI. And there's three factors I would mention. One of them is the quality, the quantity, and the trust. So for us, how we tackle the problem of quality is that when we first started, we really developed a process of collecting data ourselves. So that means we developed an application where somebody would take an image or multiple images and send them, and then would give those images to a specialist, in-house specialist, and they would label those images. So it's completely humans. And then we send them back, push them back to the interface, mobile interface for the consumer to really look at and make an action, either buy those products or do something like that. So we had this so that we can provide value to our users while in the process we are collecting data. So, and that was good because we collected structured data in a way with all those labels that the real patients are experiencing, the real end user is experiencing. On the quantity side, obviously, you can see how that's going to take a long time. And I would say data is a bottleneck when it comes to deploying AI into products. Really, that's what's going to determine the timeline for you to deploy AI in your products. And there's different methods like web scraping. I would say, first of all, we don't really do web scraping because first of all, we don't know if it's legal or illegal. There's companies like Clearview that are now in trouble, and especially because the data we need is very sensitive. So to address that, we brought on partnerships, like partnering with the clinic, and they provide us data that they collect. And that will be unstructured data in so many ways. It won't have all the labels that we require and in the manner that we require them. So most of that we use unsupervised learning to kind of train a base model and then refine that model and focus it using that quality data trained. Last thing is obviously trust, whereby even if you have an accurate AI algorithm, AI solution, if people don't trust that solution, no one is going to use it, and therefore you've already failed. And so that brings in, does your data, can you explain how you're collecting data to your users so that they can feel safe that you're not infringing on their rights, for instance. The second thing is your data well balanced in terms of demography, but as well as the skin conditions in our case, for instance, because it's important. And I would say, really, if in audience there's people who are looking towards either starting companies in AI or even working on AI solutions, is you need to develop some intuition around who are your users and try to be in their shoes and make sure that whatever models you create works for everybody, really. And so that's because that will sort of affect trust. And if it affects trust in one segment of the community, then it affects trust in every sense, and you would have failed in your AI development. So that's how I would answer that question.
Let me also continue here. Like, I think how John is doing is like super perfect in the regard. It's like you start with the problem, you start collecting the data, whatever you can get to solve the problem or to help with the customer. And then there's some, like, from the other perspective, what we are doing. So since we are helping companies to manage their data, we see all the problems they face. And apparently like 1/3 of all ML projects in industry fail because having no solid data foundation. And more than that, you have data scientists that spend, like, there's a joke running around that say, like, data scientists spend 80% of their time on wrangling with the data and 20% on complaining that they spend their 80% on wrangling with the data. So meaning that if you start with your foundation correct, then your data scientists will have more time actually focusing on models. And secondly, I think there's also very running big topics in data, especially on the collection and then usage, is trying to understand what are the biases inside the data. And then even like the wrong collection itself can affect the model. So if you have garbage in, you get garbage out. So you have to be very, very careful on building this from the collection through annotation, storage, and then you also apply some transformations on top of these data sets before feeding to the models. And you have to be very careful towards the problems that you're solving to be able to resolve any biases from the beginning till the end. So I think that's the quality there. It matters a lot. But at the same time, if you start to solve the problem thinking that you're going to get perfect data, that's a very wrong approach, and that will not take you so far because you will spend so much time on to perfecting something that you really don't know if it's going to be used. I think the way I've seen at least a lot of companies succeeding is like you get an MVP out, you make sure that it's working end to end, and then you start iterating and optimizing your data pipelines, including your models, till the end.
Now, that's great advice from all the experts, okay? I found a book. It's called The AI First Company, How to Compete and Win with Artificial Intelligence by Ash Fontana. And on the question of getting the data, chapter 3, page 69. There's so many things on collecting data. on here, like perishability of the data and every single thing like that. You'll have a blast reading this book. I love this book, by the way. I'm just like really well organized, super dope. Like, yeah. In terms of collecting data, it's really particular to your problem. Think about it. So there's no one size fit all answer, right? And what I'm doing is that initially we're going to have to create trust with the customer. We're going to have to beta test. We're not going to have to build deep relationship with the people that you're helping so that they trust you, that you're not going to be doing any nefarious thing. Like I'm essentially collecting data on people's emails, right? So that's pretty sensitive, right? And so in the contract, I'll state like, we're collecting this to teach the machine to become smarter. We're not going to sell your data to any third parties and stuff like that. And then we're going to have to honor that contract. That's it. But then I expect that there will be more challenges.
Great, thank you so much. Now it's 6:45, so we'll be opening the floor to any questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, just feel free to ask in the chat or in person as well. Yes.
I'll just say the question.
Yeah, you can just ask the question, or do you want to come up to us?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sure. If you're comfortable with me.
Oh, yeah, sure. I don't know if you guys can hear me or not, but okay, cool.
Yes, we can.
All right. So I know, especially Tuan talked a lot about like communication skill, and I know your company are like looking into that. And my question is, what's the best way to improve communication skill? Because English is not my first language, so I can relate to you when you're saying you have a lot of problem with that. So
I'll start off just straight up, read a whole bunch of sales books.
Yeah, great advice. And is there something that after you did it, you feel like a significant improvement in your communication skill? Like,
I wasn't able to hold a conversation till I was 23 years old. So just go to show, like whenever I talk to anyone, I have a script inside my head. I'm just like, okay, you need to ask them, how are you? You need to also say, good morning. I was just like, in my head, it was like so inefficient. Can we just get straight? Like, that's the type of person I am, but I learned to like be fluffy, like beat around the bushes, right? So this is something that you have to get through from experience. Like I talk to thousands of people, right? And I'm an introvert, by the way. Believe it or not, it drains you. But like I got something called the introvert hangover. So there were times when I had multiple networking events in a row. And then literally the next day, my brain cannot function. I start talking and I slur words and I can't finish my sentence. And I was like, I'm taking the day off, right? That it gets really bad to that point. But just like going to the gym, you train your muscle, it becomes stronger.
Right.
It's just gonna take time.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll just add one small thing here is that you have to decouple communication from just a language. It's not really about speaking English or whatever, but it's kind of like developing strategies on how you take a complex subject and really explain it in some relatable way based on who is your audience, kind of thing, right? So it's beyond just really practicing the language.
I agree. Well. There are nonverbal cues, like don't cross your arms. That's close body language, right? You should keep your hands out of your pocket when you talk to people, right? So there's a lot of that. A lot of that you can read in books.
Thank you for the question. Yes, do you want to come up? Or?
Hi, I had a question for Davit initially, and then I have a question for the other two. So Davit, I saw that your company is open source. So like, what are like the benefits of that? What are the downsides? And also for the other two, do you guys have any, I don't think you guys are open source, right? But do you have any plans to do that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Let me try to reason about it. I think when we started the company, it was not open source. So we had iterated on several products. But especially in our field, and especially in machine learning, the good news is that a lot of things are open source and you can pick it up and then start working with it. For us, number one goal is that the following, like we want to get adoption and easy access to other developers to be able to see what we are doing and how we are doing. And also, aside from that, building a community around the product and also getting contributions from the people who are using the product, who have this pain point that we are solving for them. They can also be part of the journey while shaping the product. The negative side is that you can't build a business on top of an open source software. So you have all these famous companies like Databricks who started from Spark, or MongoDB. They started from their open source MongoDB, and now they have their managed version or SaaS platform on top of it. Is that you get to validate, get to the users much faster and quicker. But on the other hand, you now have, like, anyone basically have the technology that you've built that can kickstart a business on top. And a very good problem to have when AWS is starting to copy you, or a Google Cloud, or they start to provide similar services. And that's what happened with MongoDB or Elastic, which they got very famous. They got super adopted. And now you have the large companies trying to copy you. And that's actually a super good problem to have, because likely you have a couple hundred ARR already operating with sales and so on. And we also see a lot of Y Combinator companies starting from open source. So it's a very, if you're building a developer tool, it's a very good and easy way for getting and validating your product, getting early adoption. And then community tells you what to build next. So you build this community, and then you have like a sense on the market itself. That's the kind of a high level overview in terms of building an open source.
Yeah, I can go on that question as well and say we're not open source, and we don't have plans to be open source. And I think, as David just said, is in our case, it doesn't make sense. Unless you're really developing developer tools, that's where usually open source makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Nitish.
Hi, thank you for all the amazing answers and being very candid as well. So a couple of questions, right? So if people have to learn about startups, so books and blogs, what are some resources to refer to? And then other question is, when is a good time to start, or when do you know that you should start, or what should you do to start? And the final question is, if you could go back in time, where would you start the company and what problem would you probably be solving? Sorry for the long extended question, but thanks.
I'll go first. Okay, I guess. Okay, fine. I started when I was young, so I guess that's really fitting. Okay. I wouldn't say that startup is for everyone, okay? Like, you gotta really know yourself, because this shit's hard, right? Like, I was completely fooled by all of the glory, right? I legit was working so hard to the point that I was beyond burnout, right? I was waking up at 5 a.m, doesn't matter when I went to bed. The moment I woke up, I did Wim Hof breathing technique. I go to the gym, and I come back. I listen to audiobooks, and got on my bike and start biking to the adventure accelerator. Like, I legit did not waste a single minute of the day for 5 years straight. Well, all the while getting my mechanical engineering degree as well. I gave up a lot. I gave up friends. I gave up a lot, right? So, like, that's something that later on I have to like it changes you as a person, and then you have to go through the like, if you're lucky, you'll be successful. And then you'll be all set from there. But then you're also very lucky if you fail, because then you also learn a lot from that, right? And so it's just depends on how much you're willing, how far are you willing to go. Like, there was times when my first company almost ran out of money. We were like 3 days away from like going bankrupt, and I managed to pull in like 50 grand. I was like, it's like, it was insane. Like, that moment in time where you're the founder and you can't you can't be sad in front of your teammates because it brings the morale down. Even like, but you have to be transparent, right? So like, there are so many things that you have to deal with psychologically, right? And so I'll tackle that part of the question first. And then the other part is like, there's just so many resources out there, online books and stuff like that. And when you dive into it, a lot of things that are good get repeated. And a lot of things that are bad, you can actually spot it, right? In terms of bad knowledge. There's like books like 0 to 1 and a whole bunch of resources in Y Combinator, right? The way that you think about startups is very different. It's a problem-solving skill that requires practicality based off of user and randomness, right? So there's a lot of ways that you are thinking about the problem. And that's why the vision of my product is far off from where I'm starting. I'm starting out with summarizing email, but later on, I'm going to be embedding this into Elon Musk Neuralink. That's how far I'm thinking ahead, but that comes with experience and thinking about it. Like it's bizarre, right? And so, and I guess the last piece is, I don't know anything about AI. Like I know enough to talk about it, but my team, my skill set is knowing how to get a team together. I built my first company getting a team from scratch, and now they're working at one of my investors' company, and they're like making bank, and they got all these experience from the startup, right? The company hired them, but not me, so I'm kind of sad about it. But I managed to now pull in together another group of passionate people. I have technical advisor from like Spotify, like lead developer in Spotify, PhD in NLP, and now I have people who are like software developers and data scientists and AI engineers are offering their time to be part of this product, right? So I focused on what I was really good at, which was compelling storytelling, compelling vision to build something that would change the world and getting people excited for it, right? I wasn't focusing on the stuff that I was weak at. Like I wasn't going to spend time learning how to code. That would take forever, right? So that's sort of like my spiel. Like the piece is, you can always acquire the knowledge that you need by spending the time to get there. You have to really know who you are before you want to start a company. You can always join a startup, right? You don't have to be the one to take the helm and take all the risk, right? And then the last piece is, if you're going to start, your team will be forever important to you and the success for the long haul. That's my spiel.
Yeah, I totally agree with John. Like you should firstly know your superpowers to start the company. Secondly, I think one of the things that you asked the questions like, what would you change if previously? I would first, like, I took a leave of absence from my PhD and then eventually dropped it. So I think one thing that I will change, and this was one of the decisions that you ever, like, at least me will always forget. Either I chose to do the company or to do my PhD, and my advisor even mentioned like, you can do both, of course, but pick one and then do it very good. So I think number one advice is like finish your studies. Number two advice, if you can get experience from working at another company or a startup to see all the uncertainties that you're going to face, that will make your life much easier when you start your own company. So I think these two things are super important, and I'll leave the rest to Sean to finalize it.
Yeah, for me, I'll be very brief on this, and I'll say build your risk capacity. It's very risky to start a business, to start a startup. It could fail. So you have to imagine the scenario also when it fails. Could you live with it, right? And so in doing so, you have to start early and make sure that your financials are in good place. Make sure that you can always get a job. For instance, if you fail, you can always get a job easily. So you have to make sure that you have those credentials. And lastly, I would suggest if anyone is thinking of starting a startup, it's usually best to start when you're still really, really young and it's not awkward, for instance, to live in your parents' basement, right? So because that would allow you to de-risk a lot of things. Your opportunity cost will be less compared to you quitting a high-paying job to start a company, for instance.
You don't have kids, you don't have wife.
Yeah.
You're single.
That's all I'll say. Yeah.
Okay, so there is a question in the chat. Oh, Tuan already answered that. Would the other two like to answer the question about regulation as a startup, dealing with regulation as a startup?
Yeah, try to avoid it as much as possible. Like getting into this spaces where there's heavy regulations. I think the number one thing is like just try to de-risk the highest impact things. So likely you won't be able to cover everything. So as long as you are sure that the highest things that are de-risks, and there's like the Coinbase story is pretty famous for that as well. I would mention the security aspect. When they started, they almost had no security. So if someone could actually go and troubleshoot and figure out the bugs or take over, then basically you will never hear the Coinbase word today. But what they did is that they just tackled the 80% of the risk every time on their security aspect and then started to solve it one by one. And at the point when they got scaled and had enough resources, now they likely solved like 99.9% of the issues. So as long as you are doing anything like risky, could be security risk, could be regulation risk, like try to tackle the 80% with 20% of effort there.
So I'll just add a quick thing because we're in health tech and there's a lot of regulations. So one thing, you can never say that you are not aware of regulations. So you really need to do your due diligence. So for instance, we deal with medical data sometimes. So we have to make sure that we are HIPAA compliant as best as you can, because sometimes also it's a chicken and egg problem, right? Because you can't be HIPAA compliant if you don't have any data at all, like if you don't have any medical data at all, right? So really it's, you just have to be careful when you're in that field. Yeah, I know the regulations that exist.
You'll learn. Depending on what field you're in, you'll learn. You know how much I know about giving scholarships away? Holy crap, more than I need.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for all your advice, and thank you so much for the great insight. So I guess for the last few minutes of the panel, we can give the panelists the opportunity to talk more about their companies and yeah, let's get started with Jean and move on to David and lastly Tuan.
Yeah, so our company called UCI, we are based in Toronto and we are building a software to help skin clinics offer a complete teledermatology experience. We are a team of 7 individuals. We've existed for 1 year now. We're still very early stage. When we started, it was completely a teledermatology sort of platform, and now we are injecting more AI to kind of bring efficiency. So really, and I would hope everyone please Google us out and follow us, and follow our story as we grow and develop.
Since John, go ahead.
Go for it. You first. Go for
it. Sure. So since there was a question about open source, we are building an open source Python package, Hub. It's called Hub. You can just pip install Hub and then start building your data sets for you to train and build your AI products. If anyone interested, feel free to join our community. We have a Slack community about 900 data scientists, engineers, students, researchers, and help us to shape the future of the data.
Well, you can go to thepointai.com. It's really how to spell. The beta is coming out really soon. So if you'd like to test out how crappy my AI is going to work, please sign up. And then I'll summarize your email for you.
Thank you so much. So that is the end of today's panel. Thank you so much to all the panelists for taking time today to speak with us.
Feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn too. We're all on LinkedIn.
I'll be sharing the recording of this panel to both the panelists and the audience. You can find it on YouTube, and I'll also share the LinkedIn and contact information if the panelists are comfortable with that, with the AI Club Discord and community. Thank you so much for coming. So I'll see you guys another time, and I'll keep in contact.
Thank you very much for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night. It's 10 a.m. over here. I mean, PM over here.
Yeah.
Bye,
All right, guys. All right, bye.